Do 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 do. It took me a while to get here, didn't it? I got a bunch of lighting equipment on the floor. I was building, and I had to step over it. So sorry. As I just mentioned in my prior video, this holiday season, and of course, I'm not a huge fan. You said the guy that's got that, hundreds and hundreds of lenses. I'm not a huge fan of gas. However, I've got it just like the rest of you. But instead of lusting after the next camera and/or lens, you really, need to hone your lust for lighting. Lighting is absolutely everything, and I wanted to point out just a few. Actually, it's one of the most important things about lighting that people don't take into consideration. I mean, what happens? It seems like the obvious. And of course, descriptions are not explanations, as I've famously said over and over again. That when you bring a speed light along, we're just talking about speed lights. Well, we're talking about lighting in general. Well, let's just say a speed light. When you bring a speed light along or any lighting tool, you're not adding lighting. You're adding control. Instead of saying I brought a light, so what did you bring with you today? I brought my camera and so lens and so lens, and I brought lighting control. Oh, what do you mean you brought lighting? I mean, I brought control to the scene. Now, when we're walking around doing travel photography, when's the last time you saw somebody doing travel photography with a speed light? I never see it. I famously actually see people doing paid-for professional photography out of this beautiful park in the spring and summertime, and it's like nobody ever brings lighting. It's just, well, we're just going to rely on the ambient lighting. And even if the ambient lighting, like early morning, late evening, is really great, it still sucks. Because you could do a lot more with an old junky camera, so to say, junky camera, and good lighting than you can with the best camera and the best lens, and being a slave to the ambient lighting that you actually have to deal with. Let's just go down a short list of the things that I can guarantee you that you have not considered, or at least not even considered at least half of these. Sensor saturation. Okay? As I've said famously, I want to say famously, I don't want to say I famously said something. I guess that sounds kind of odd. As I've said, you need to saturate in your camera, i.e. on the RAW files. Of course, why it's so important to shoot RAW. I always shoot RAW plus fine JPEG, by the way. Of course, there's ease of use as far as siphoning through your photos afterwards if you shoot RAW plus fine, but that's a matter for another topic. That you saturate in your camera, and of course you expose in your computer in post-production, Lightroom, Photoshop, or Capture One, or what else you use. Sensor saturation is insanely important. But even if you saturate in camera, you can never get the image fidelity, no matter what good camera or awesome camera or lens that you actually have, if you don't actually have. And everything, by the way, all these professional lighting tools, like the studio strobes behind me, the half dozen studio strobes in the other room, and this Godox 8200, and this Godox speed, they're all the damn same thing. They're nothing other than xenon tubes that are powered by a bank of capacitors with X or minus lighting, color control. But of course, you got to take care of that with color balance and post-production. So just a bank of capacitors and control. And of course, some are hypersync units, and most of them, of course, are high-speed sync units. And the distinction there is that one is pulse light. You can never see it when you do high-speed sync photography, but it's actually blinking super, super fast. Then, of course, the power tapers off dramatically because the capacitor can only dump and recharge so many times to a certain level. You actually can't do high-speed sync flash photography at high power like you could at regular sync photography because the capacitor is charging and dumping so quickly. That is the reason why the power is so diminished. And this, of course, is when people first start learning about lighting, they get the oohs and the ahs for high-speed sync, and then they realize that everything is about hypersync flash photography. But ultimately, it's all about lighting control. But you cannot get the sensor saturation from any sort of ambient lighting with even the best camera lenses you can with a friggin' $110 speed light. Not that this one's $110, but like a Godox 685. Dynamic range compression. This is, of course, where you're actually exposing for your ambient and raising up your subject illumination. Everybody like, well, I'm waiting for the next camera with a zillion stops of dynamic range. It's like, well, instead of that, if you're doing reach out and touch photography, which is not applicable for landscape photography, and most architectural photography. But for everything else, your speedlight or your studio strobe, and or both, of course, is a dynamic range compression. Gives you control over your shadows to your highlights. You set the midpoint for, and of course, this is where learning lighting ratios is so freaking important. You need to learn the zone system too. The zone system is as applicable to digital photography as it ever was for film. But you have control over your dynamic range. Let's go on to point number 3. And there's a really long list here, and that's ultimate image fidelity. Everybody's heard about flash pop, and I said, wow, that's it. But I mean, have you actually ever thought or posted in your head, why is it that this same shot using a speedlight or studio strobe looks so much better? I mean, it just pops. You need to consider what the hell is sitting over top of your sensor. There's an IR hot filter, which is a significantly heavy filter. And of course you have a UV filter. But you also have a color filter array, an RGB array, whether that be X-trans array or bare array, doesn't make any difference. You have all these filters that are sitting over top of the damn sensor. You don't want, by the way, this is a full spectrum camera, yeah, right here, right? So it picks up a lot and it always overexposes because it's seeing a lot more light. It's actually confused by the correct exposure it should have. But I mean, all those filters, no matter what camera you have, Zeiss, Leica, Sony, Fujifilm, Nikon, it doesn't make any difference. You have all these filters that are cutting out the ambient. This is the reason why flash photography looks so much better. The exact same shot in flash photography. If you take the exact same famous photographer, for example, and he does the exact same shot using ambient lighting as he does with doing a flash shot, you say, wow, that looks so much better. The tonality, the gradation, the saturation. Flash photography is insanely important. And by the way, you think you could drag your sliders in post-production to get that sort of image output. You cannot. You cannot make things manifest that were never there to begin with. Yes, you could drag this, the contrast sliders and your saturation sliders, whatever way you want. Of course, make things look completely unnatural, but nothing will come off looking as amazing as a flash shot. Ultimate image control. There's, of course, several layers of photography. There's, point-and-shoot photography, and this one's a full-spectrum camera. I mean, that's the only reason I have this thing. It's full spectrum. Point-and-shoot photography, then, of course, you got the advanced amateur that buys themselves a nice camera and lens and, taking some lovely shots, and isn't that nice? But I mean, when it comes to doing architectural photography, product photography especially, commercial, corporate, event photography, everything is about lighting control. And if you show up to do a shoot with the most expensive camera and lens, let's just say medium format. Let's just say you show up with a GFX 100 and a lens. And isn't that nice? Yes, that's nice. But it's still no damn good without the lighting. Even though it's 102 megapixels in medium format, and I love that camera to death, I'm still waiting on mine, by the way, is never going to compare to that same damn camera and lens, or any camera lens with a speed light or studio strobe. And I just got done talking in the prior video about the 3 echelons or 3 levels of flash photography, and they're all xenon tube photography. Speed lights, perfect middle ground, Godox AD200, which is the most versatile lighting tool ever made, period. Flat out, bar none. Well, Speedlight kind of is, but this has got the power and the versatility. I've had so many dreams about all the things and ways I could mod and do with this. I've thought of a lot of them. And of course, lastly, studio strobes. So you have ultimate image control. And of course, with that, given the fact that you actually have control over your ambient lighting and your subject lighting, you have also much greater compositional control of your shot. You also got an enormous amount more control over shadow gradation. As I already mentioned too, slow shutter speed, image freeze. People don't realize, or at least they don't think very often, that IBIS, well, everybody loves to talk about how much they love IBIS. IBIS does nothing for subject motion, yeah? Oh my God, the shot is, I took a 1/10 of a second handheld shot. Yeah, but your subject is blurred because it's still 1/10 of a second. IBIS does nothing for subject motion. No form of IBIS does, ever will, ever has. Why do people keep forgetting that fact? You could take you could have your subject perfectly sharp, depending on your lighting ratios, meaning it's pretty damn dark, right? You can have a perfectly sharp subject with no IBIS, handheld at 1 second shutter speed, because your actual shutter speed then becomes your flash pulse duration, yeah? And the typical speed light pulse duration is average, the typical, depends on what power it's at, average is about 1/8,000th of a second, 1/12,000th of a second, depending on the speed light. And that, of course, becomes your actual shutter speed, not the 1 second speed you actually had on your camera when you took, wow, I took this shot without IBIS and the shutter speed was 1 second. It's like, oh, how did you do that? Your subject is perfectly sharp and frozen in time. Sharp, razor sharp. It's because my shutter speed wasn't a 1 second on my camera, it was a 1/10,000th flash burst from my speed. That's control. You know, that is control. There's so many endless layers of control with xenon flash bulb lighting as there is without. I don't care how good your camera is. Hell, it could be a GFX 100, like I said. Still, got to have the lighting. Like I said, also too, once again, the worst lens with lighting is always better than the best lens with no lighting. You've also got the foreground and background control. Well, how do you control, background control in your compositional shot and exposure with a speed light that don't reach that damn far? Well, you control it by exposing for your ambient. This is why, flash photography shot in manual is so important. Yeah, just stick your camera in manual, okay? You expose for your ambient lighting to whatever level you want it to be. However, sensor saturation is still always important. And then you raise your subject illumination to what you want it to be. This is why everybody needs to learn about lighting ratios. Do a Google search on lighting ratios and teach yourself about lighting ratios. I got more than a few videos on lighting ratios also. But, when you actually have... That was weird, my iPad was making noise. When you actually have... control over your subject illumination, it also gives you control over your background, because then you only need to expose, like I said, for your background, and then you raise your subject up to whatever level you want. Yeah, perfect lighting ratio control. You either hunt for the light or you make it, and when you make it, you have complete control over it. It's kind of like a hunter. There's kind of two different, and I'm not a hunter, by the way. There's two levels of hunters. There are people that go walk 1 billion miles to hunt down their prey. And then there's a smarter hunter that knows what the animal wants, and he it's called salting the area, like deer like salt blocks or something like that. Yeah, salt blocks and other things. And you just sit yourself in one spot, you sit there on your butt because, the animals are attracted to that thing that, you're hunting for it. No. You're supposed to make it manifest. You're supposed to have complete control over it. That really is the only true definition of professional photography, is absolute, or as best as absolute as possible. Of course, you can't do much in landscape photography. Yeah, if everything's 1,000,000 miles away, yeah. You're not, speed lights, studio strobes aren't going to do anything. Yes, I know that. But that is the true definition of professional photography, is actually having control over every aspect of your lighting to the maximum allowable possibility. And this is undeniable by anybody. No one's going to say, hey, is this fat, bald, tattooed guy wrong? It's like, no, he's right. He's absolutely right. Here's another example. Why do you think a monochromatic camera looks more detailed? Forget flash photography, no flash attached. Because the image fidelity, there's no color filter array over top of the sensor, cutting the light. What do you think? By having no color filter array, and a filter is a filter is a filter, by having no color filter array over top of the sensor, your sensor does get more saturation and more image delivered to, the RAW and JPEG files dropped onto your card. Yes? 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 The exact same analogy, using a regular camera with a color filter array attached, just a conventional, normal, professional camera. What the hell do you think speedlight flash photography does? Or I should call it what it really is. It's just xenon tube photography. And all of these are xenon tubes. The professional studio strobe back here, the Godox 8200, the speedlight. What do you think it adds? It gives you image fidelity and saturation to the shot. Doesn't matter if you have the best lens and camera in the world, it will not compare to the same camera and lens with, a $110 speedlight and a $70 X Pro trigger. And brilliantly, Godox is brilliant on this front. They have the exact same freaking trigger for the 8200, which I got 3 of these, by the way. Everybody should own a Godox 8200. Um, People want, like I said, more and more dynamic range, but when you have control over your lighting, the answer is flash photography. You have control over the dynamic range of your shot. I've not heard another YouTuber ever mention the fact that when you have control over your subject illumination, you also then have control over your background illumination. It's like, well, how is that possible? You can't actually add anything to like that tree that's a half a mile off in the distance. Sure you can. Well, how's that possible? When you have control over your subject illumination, yeah, you also control over your background illumination. You just expose for your ambient, i.e. your background and surrounding, things that are not affected by the flash, and then you just raise your subject up to whatever level you want with this. That is dynamic range control. What a xenon tube aspect of photography, which is speed lights and 8200s and professional studios, all the same stuff. Doesn't matter if it's a $20,000 Broncolor unit, a $300 8200 Godox, or a $500 Paul C. Buff Einstein, or an Ellen Chrome. Doesn't matter. All of this crap is xenon tube flash photography. It gives you control over virtually every aspect of any type of photography you would ever want to do. And I know there are places where you can't use flash photography, okay? And I know that a flash of any power is not going to do anything for taking pictures of landscapes. I know this, but 100% of everything else, except for architecture, you're not going to control. Which is architecture really, like huge architecture is basically no different than landscape photography in essence. Other than that, this lighting gives you control over everything. Gives you so many more possibilities. Oh my God, I got the best camera and lens in the world. It's like, yeah, that's great. Where the hell is your lighting? Lighting! Because that's how people talk about it. I swear to God, of all the questions I get, on a daily basis, and I get like 60 questions a day. This is where I'm going to pontificate. 60 questions a day on average, day after day after day, year after year. What's the percentage of questions I actually get on lighting? People are like, everything is just like this. Like, what sort of lens or camera should I buy? Lens or camera, lens or camera, camera, lens, camera, lens. Like, what's the percentage I actually get questions on lighting? Way less than 1%. And that is not right. No! No! Like, Somebody screen grab this. It'll make me look like an idiot. Error! That's just so wrong! It's wrong! You get a lot more questions. Like, what do people ask me questions like, hey, what sort of lighting you recommend? I'm going to do this sort of. I never get, I do, but it's like less than 1%. Yeah? Yeah? Yeah. It's less than 1%. It shouldn't be that way. Said the guy that's got, how many cameras, professional cameras do I got? Like 15? I think I got 15. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lenses, literally. But man, I have hot, sexy dreams about lighting equipment. I've had more than a few dreams where in my dream I built a unique type of lighting modifier. That is the sexy stuff. And by the way, that is where, listen closely, girlfriend, that is where 100% of the money is to be made in photography. Product photography, corporate event, lighting! You show up to an event, and you just got like, I've got a couple cameras and 4 lenses. That's great. Where's your lighting? If you don't have control over your lighting, you're nothing other than a peckerhead doing shutterbug photography with a really, really expensive camera and lens. Is that blunt? I think that's pretty blunt. But it is also 100% accurate, and there's not a single professional photographer in the entire world that is going to find disagreement with the statements I've made in this video, because it is 100% impossible! Here's a suggestion. This season, this New Year's Eve resolution, at least erase 20% of the hots you got for the next camera and lens coming out, and fill that with lighting! Because lighting is important. It's not actually important, it's the most important thing. I hope you liked this video. If you did, you could always click the link below. Or you can tell me how much you hated it. You can tell me you can jump off a cliff. Anything is warmly welcomed, but what I said in this video is 100% correct. Mic drop. Oh, God.